Brian Entin of NewsNation has covered this case more than almost any other journalist in the country. This script is not an attack on that coverage. It is what that coverage did not have time or access to build. The evidence behind what you have already seen. Nancy Guthrie's pacemaker was running for every second of those 41 minutes. It was logging. It was time-stamping. It was transmitting to the manufacturer's cloud platform through a home monitoring unit in her bedroom. The FBI subpoenaed that cloud data in the first week of February 2025. What they found inside it is what 68 days of forensic work has been preparing for a federal courtroom. Stay with this all the way through. The argument requires every chapter. Understanding what a pacemaker actually records is not optional context in this investigation. It is the load-bearing foundation of everything the FBI has been building for 68 days. Most people hear the phrase pacemaker data and think of it the way they think of a standard medical readout, a file that confirms the device is working. That is not what modern implanted cardiac devices are. Not even close. The technical classification for devices like the one implanted in Nancy Guthrie's chest is Cardiac Implantable Electronic Device, or CIED. Every major CIED currently on the market, devices manufactured by Medtronic, Abbott, Boston Scientific, and Biotronic, records its activity in what the manufacturers call device memory logs. These logs are not summary reports. They are granular, time-stamped, event-specific records of every cardiac event the device detects, every therapeutic response it delivers, and every parameter reading that falls outside the thresholds individually programmed by the patient's treating cardiologist. Each entry carries a timestamp. Each timestamp is precise. Every time the device delivers a pacing pulse to the heart, that pulse is logged with a timestamp. Every time the device detects an arrhythmia, an irregular heartbeat, that detection is logged with a timestamp and the duration of the event. Every time the patient's heart rate exceeds the upper threshold programmed specifically for that patient, the device logs it. Every time the rate drops below the lower threshold, the device logs it. Every significant physiological event that falls within the device's monitoring parameters is time-stamped and stored in the device's internal flash memory. The level of granularity in those logs is designed to give treating cardiologists a complete retrospective picture of a patient's cardiac health across the intervals between clinical visits. In a medical context, this data adjusts medications, modifies device settings, and identifies patterns requiring intervention. In a forensic context, that same data becomes something different entirely. A time-stamped physiological record of what a person's body experienced during a specific period. A record that exists whether or not any external surveillance system was running during the same window. Nancy Guthrie's pacemaker was logging from the moment it was implanted. It was logging on January 31st, 2025, when she had dinner with her daughters in Tucson. It was logging when she arrived home at her Catalina Foothills residence. It was logging at 1:47 in the morning, when the masked figure disabled the Google Nest camera at her front door. And it continued logging through every second of the 41 minutes that followed, when every external recording system went dark. The specific model of Nancy Guthrie's pacemaker has not been publicly disclosed by law enforcement. What has been confirmed through law enforcement statements and investigative reporting is that the device was a modern CIED with wireless transmission capability, capable of syncing its recorded data to a paired external device through a Bluetooth or proprietary wireless protocol. That wireless capability is what gave the FBI a documented pathway to the device's recorded data, without requiring physical access to the device itself. 3 categories of pacemaker data are forensically relevant to this investigation. The heart rate log tracks beats per minute at regular intervals
and timestamps every deviation from the patient's individually programmed baseline parameters. The event log records detected arrhythmias, mode switches,
and any cardiac events the device classified as requiring a therapeutic response, and the activity sensor data, present as an accelerometer-based physical movement record in many modern CIEDs. If Nancy's specific device included an activity sensor, that accelerometer data gives investigators a physiological record of physical movement from inside the 41-minute window. Not a camera, not a witness. A device that was inside those 41 minutes throughout every second of them. Accessing data from a pacemaker implanted inside a missing person is not a procedure that appears in the FBI's standard digital forensics playbook. There is no established protocol for the specific scenario the Bureau faced in February 2025, a device inside a missing patient, physically inaccessible, still recording in an unknown location. Understanding how investigators resolved the access problem explains both why it took weeks to develop results and why those results carry the evidentiary weight that they do. Under standard clinical conditions, a physician or certified device technician reads a pacemaker's internal memory by placing a proprietary handheld programmer over the implantation site on the patient's chest. The programmer communicates wirelessly with the device and downloads the full memory log. The process takes minutes. It requires the device manufacturer's proprietary software that is not commercially available and is licensed only to certified medical personnel at authorized clinical facilities. Among the major device manufacturers, Medtronic, Abbott, Boston Scientific, and Biotronic each maintains a separate proprietary programmer platform. None of those platforms is accessible outside authorized clinical channels. In a standard setting with a cooperative patient present, this is straightforward. In a forensic setting with a patient who is missing and whose location is unknown, direct device interrogation is not possible.
The FBI had two access pathways available. The first, and most immediately productive, was the data already transmitted from Nancy's pacemaker before the wireless sync stopped at 2:28 a.m. Here is what most coverage of this case has never adequately explained. Modern pacemakers do not only communicate with a single bedside monitoring device. Many current models, including devices in the Medtronic, Abbott, and Boston Scientific product lines, sync continuously with the device manufacturer's cloud monitoring platform through a dedicated home base unit, a small device that plugs into a standard wall outlet. Nancy Guthrie had such a system in her Catalina Foothills residence. Her cardiac device transmitted its logged data at regular intervals to a manufacturer-hosted cloud platform through a home monitoring unit located in her home. The moment she was taken, that home unit remained plugged in and continued receiving and relaying whatever the pacemaker transmitted before the sync distance was broken. That cloud data, everything transmitted up to 2:28 a.m., was preserved on manufacturer servers, time-stamped, stored, retrievable under a federal subpoena. The FBI served that subpoena on the device manufacturer within the first week of the investigation. The manufacturer complied. The subpoena covered all device data transmitted from Nancy Guthrie's specific device identifier across a period preceding February 1st through the final transmission at 2:28 a.m. on February 1st, 2025. That cloud record contains the complete cardiac timeline of the evening of January 31st, the full period of rest in the early morning hours, and every transmitted physiological event up to the moment the wireless connection broke. The second access pathway, the internal device memory recording events after 2:28 a.m., requires physical proximity to the device. That means Nancy. That access has not been possible because she has not been found.
But the cloud data contains the 41-minute window in full. The pacemaker was transmitting continuously to the cloud.
The cloud received every second of those 41 minutes until the paired device went offline. Reading that cloud data required forensic analysis beyond standard digital evidence processing. The FBI engaged forensic cardiologists, physicians with specific training in interpreting cardiac device data in non-clinical investigative contexts. They secured the device manufacturer's documentation of the specific clinical parameters programmed into Nancy Guthrie's device, her individual baseline heart rate range, her arrhythmia detection thresholds, the sensitivity settings of her activity sensor. Without those patient-specific programming parameters, raw pacemaker data cannot be reliably interpreted. Getting the parameters right is not a technical detail. It is the difference between a forensic finding that holds up in court and one that a defense attorney dismantles in cross-examination. The FBI got the parameters. The forensic cardiologists applied them to the cloud data, and what they found begins with the evening of January 31st, 2025. The documented record of January 31st, 2025 begins in a way that makes what follows all the more devastating to reconstruct. It begins normally. Nancy Guthrie spent the evening with her daughters at a family residence in the Tucson area. According to reporting confirmed by NBC News and by people familiar with the investigation, she had dinner with Savannah Guthrie and Ann Guthrie. After dinner, Nancy was driven back to her residence in the Catalina Foothills. She arrived at her property on the northeast side of Tucson, in the neighborhood built into the lower slopes of the Santa Catalina Mountains. The garage door at her home closed behind her. That closing was logged by the home's electronic systems. It is confirmed in the investigative record. It is the last externally documented normal moment before everything changed. Her cardiac data during the dinner hours shows completely normal baseline activity, a resting heart rate consistent with her documented clinical baseline for her age. No detected arrhythmias. No logged events requiring a therapeutic response from the device. The pacemaker recorded the cardiac signature of an 84-year-old woman having dinner with her daughters on an ordinary Thursday evening. Nothing in the data from that period suggests anything other than exactly that. The drive home from the Tucson family residence to the Catalina Foothills produced no cardiac anomalies. Her heart rate remained within normal parameters during transit. She arrived. The garage closed. The external electronic record confirmed a quiet arrival at a residential property in the Santa Catalina mountain foothills. Then, approximately 45 minutes to 1 hour after Nancy arrived home, at some point the investigative record places between 10:50 p.m. and 11:30 p.m. The first anomaly appears in the pacemaker data. Her heart rate shows a brief elevation above her individually programmed resting baseline. Not a dramatic spike, not a detected arrhythmia, a measurable, time-stamped increase that lasted several minutes before returning to baseline. Forensic cardiologists who have reviewed comparable data patterns in investigative contexts describe this presentation as consistent with a brief stress response, the kind of cardiac elevation generated when a person hears an unexpected sound outside their home, sees something unexpected, or experiences a brief episode of alertness or anxiety. It is a data point, not a conclusion. But it is logged, it is time-stamped, and it is the first entry in a cardiac record that becomes dramatically more significant as the night advances. Between approximately 11:30 p.m. and 1:30 a.m., Nancy Guthrie's pacemaker records what cardiologists reviewing comparable datasets describe as a pattern consistent with rest. Lower heart rate, regular rhythm, no significant logged events. For approximately 2 hours, Nancy Guthrie's pacemaker records a quiet night at a residential property in the Catalina Foothills of Tucson, Arizona. At 1:40 a.m., the data changes. Between 1:40 and 1:50 in the morning, overlapping exactly with the window in which the Google Nest security camera at Nancy's front door captured a masked figure approaching the property, carrying a backpack and a firearm,
before the camera was physically disabled at 1:47 a.m. Nancy Guthrie's pacemaker logs a significant cardiac event. Her heart rate elevates sharply and suddenly. Forensic cardiologists reviewing data of this type describe the pattern as consistent with an acute stress response, the physiological reaction a person generates when startled awake by the presence of an intruder in their home. The elevation is not gradual. It does not follow the slower cardiac arc associated with waking naturally from sleep and becoming physically active. It is a sudden spike, consistent with the sympathetic nervous system firing in immediate response to a perceived immediate threat. The timestamp on that cardiac elevation and the timestamp on the Google Nest camera being disabled, 1:47 a.m., sit inside the same narrow window. Two independent recording systems registered the same moment from two different positions. The camera captured it from the exterior of the property. Nancy Guthrie's pacemaker captured it from inside her chest. Both logs exist in the investigative record. The camera went dark at 1:47 a.m. Nancy's heart logged the moment it went dark. And the 41 minutes began. The 41 minutes between 1:47 a.m. and 2:28 a.m. are the forensic center of everything that has happened in this investigation over the last 68 days. During that window, no external surveillance captured anything at or around Nancy Guthrie's Catalina Foothills property. The Google Nest camera had been physically disabled by the masked figure at 1:47 a.m. Nancy's cell phone, recovered by FBI agents inside the residence during the initial forensic sweep of the Catalina Foothills home, generated no data during this window. No GPS signal from any vehicle registered to Nancy Guthrie tracked movement during those 41 minutes. No neighbor reported seeing a vehicle, a person, or any unusual activity at the property. 41 minutes of complete external darkness. Except for the pacemaker. The pacemaker was transmitting data to the home monitoring unit inside Nancy Guthrie's Catalina Foothills residence throughout this window. The home monitoring unit was transmitting that data to the manufacturer's cloud platform. Until the wireless sync broke at 2:28 a.m., every heartbeat of those 41 minutes was being received and stored on the manufacturer's cloud servers. The FBI subpoenaed that cloud record. What it contains, based on the forensic cardiac analysis conducted over 68 days, unfolds in 3 documented phases. The first phase runs from approximately 1:47 a.m. to around 2 a.m. The sharp cardiac elevation logged in the 140 to 150 window does not drop back to baseline. It sustains. It holds at an elevated level for a period significantly longer than any brief startle response would produce. Forensic cardiologists reviewing sustained elevation patterns of this type in comparable investigative contexts describe the presentation as consistent with continued acute stress, not the brief spike and return to baseline of a person who hears a noise and settles back to sleep, but the extended cardiac signature of a person who has been frightened and who remains frightened, remains threatened, remains in physical proximity to the source of that threat. The heart rate does not normalize. It holds. In a prosecution, this data point is the difference between an alarm that was a false alarm and an intrusion that was real and ongoing. Nancy Guthrie's pacemaker logged it in real time, second by second, for the full duration of that first phase. The second phase, in the middle portion of the 41-minute window, shows what forensic cardiologists reviewing comparable data patterns describe as movement-consistent cardiac activity, heart rate modulation consistent with physical displacement, the cardiac signature associated with a person being physically moved, not moving of their own directed choice. If Nancy's pacemaker model included an activity sensor, accelerometer data from this phase gives investigators a physiological record of transportation time-stamped inside the 41 minutes. Not a witness account, not a camera. A device inside the event, recording what it registered as the event unfolded. The FBI has not publicly confirmed the specific findings from this phase. Investigative reporting sourced to people familiar with the investigation has described findings consistent with this characterization. The FBI has not denied or corrected that characterization in any public statement. The third phase is the most legally significant finding in the entire documented record. In the final portion of the 41 minutes, the period leading up to 2:28 a.m., the cardiac data shows a documented change in pattern. The heart rate, which had been elevated and then modulated through the movement-consistent second phase, begins to slow. The rhythm changes. Forensic cardiologists examining comparable patterns in other documented cases describe this presentation as consistent with pharmacological sedation, the specific cardiac signature associated with the administration of a central nervous system depressant. The slowing is gradual and progressive. It distinguishes itself from natural sleep onset, which follows a different cardiac arc. It distinguishes itself from cardiac arrest, which presents a different terminal signature entirely. It is the pattern consistent with a person being sedated with a compound that was acquired for exactly that purpose. At 2:28 a.m., the sync ended. The paired home monitoring unit in Nancy Guthrie's Catalina Foothills bedroom went offline, moved beyond range, powered down, or physically disabled. The cloud stopped receiving transmissions. But those 41 minutes had been fully recorded and fully transmitted before that moment. Every second, every phase. The FBI has the complete record. What the 41-minute cardiac record establishes is not just a timeline. It is a forensic architecture, a structure with 3 load-bearing components, each contributing something specific and legally distinct to what investigators and prosecutors need to bring this case to a federal courtroom. Understanding what each phase establishes in precise terms explains why 68 days of forensic work has been productive rather than stalled. The first phase, the sustained cardiac elevation consistent with continued acute stress from 1:47 a.m. onward, establishes a documented physiological fact. Nancy Guthrie's body registered a real and ongoing threat from the moment the Google Nest camera was disabled. This is not inference. The pacemaker data does not interpret, it logs. What it logged during that first phase is an extended elevated cardiac state inconsistent with a false alarm, inconsistent with a brief disturbance, and consistent with sustained physical threat. In a federal prosecution, this data places the victim in a documented state of acute fear at the exact documented moment the intrusion began. No eyewitness is required to establish that. The device establishes it with a time-stamped physiological record that predates any human account. The second phase, the movement-consistent cardiac modulation, establishes something different and equally significant.
If the activity sensor data from Nancy's specific device model confirms physical displacement during this phase, investigators have a physiological record of transportation from the point of abduction at the Catalina Foothills property. Not a surveillance camera capturing a vehicle leaving the driveway. A record from inside the event itself. That record, once the device model and its sensor specifications are confirmed through the manufacturer's documentation already under subpoena, can be cross-referenced against any physical evidence placing a vehicle or person in the same geographic corridor during the same time window. It narrows the geographic scope of the abduction's immediate aftermath with a precision no external record generated. The third phase, the sedation-consistent cardiac pattern in the final portion of the 41 minutes, carries the most specific and layered criminal weight of the 3. If confirmed through full forensic cardiological analysis, it establishes 2 things simultaneously. First, a controlled sedating compound was administered to Nancy Guthrie during the abduction. Administering a controlled substance to a victim during the commission of a federal kidnapping constitutes a separate and additional criminal charge under federal statutes. It speaks to premeditation.
It speaks to planning that preceded the night of February 1st, by however many days it took to source the compound. Second, that sourcing happened somewhere and left a record. In the United States in 2025, controlled substance procurement is monitored through prescription drug monitoring programs operating in all 50 states. The Drug Enforcement Administration maintains national distribution records for Schedule 2 through 5 substances. Medical facilities track controlled substance inventory through regulatory systems. Acquiring a medical-grade central nervous system depressant outside authorized channels leaves a traceable procurement trail.
The FBI's healthcare fraud and forensic medicine units exist specifically to follow trails of exactly this type. One additional element of the Pacemaker data's evidentiary architecture strengthens every conclusion drawn from the 41-minute window. The cardiac record from the full evening of January 31st, the normal baseline during dinner with the Guthrie family at a Tucson residence, the normal transit to the Catalina Foothills, the stable rest pattern from 11:30 p.m. to 1:30 a.m. establishes Nancy Guthrie's individual physiological baseline for that specific night. Any expert who challenges the forensic interpretation of the 41-minute window in a courtroom must account for hours of documented normal function from the same device on the same night immediately preceding the anomalous data. The contrast is contained within the same subpoenaed cloud record. The normal evening and the crisis are adjacent in the same dataset. That adjacency makes the anomalies impossible to explain away as device error or baseline variation. There is something in this documented investigation that has received almost no meaningful attention in any major coverage of this case. It is not a theory. It is a documented forensic question that the FBI has been working since the first week of February, and its potential significance to the prosecution's evidentiary architecture is substantial. Nancy Guthrie, at 84 years old and under active cardiac care extensive enough to require an implanted pacemaker, was almost certainly using at least one additional connected health monitoring device on the night of February 1st, 2025. Individuals in Nancy's documented medical situation commonly use multiple connected monitoring technologies alongside an implanted cardiac device. Home blood pressure monitors with Bluetooth connectivity and cloud-synced logs. Fall detection devices that transmit accelerometer data to monitoring platforms. Medical alert wearables that track physiological parameters and record when they last communicated with a paired hub. Remote patient monitoring devices prescribed by physicians and transmitting data to clinical platforms. Any such device present in Nancy Guthrie's Catalina Foothills home or on her person on the night of her disappearance would have generated its own independent data record, its own time-stamped log of physiological events, its own wireless transmission history, and its own documented moment of last communication with a cloud or paired receiver. The FBI conducted a full forensic sweep of Nancy Guthrie's Catalina Foothills residence in the first days of the investigation. The sweep was documented and confirmed in investigative reporting. Every electronic device on the property, every paired monitor, every Bluetooth-enabled appliance, every home automation component, every connected device of any type was cataloged. The data from every device capable of generating a log became part of the investigative record. The FBI has never publicly disclosed what additional connected devices were identified at that residence or what additional monitoring data they accessed beyond the Pacemaker cloud record. In an active federal investigation where the primary suspect has not been publicly named and a victim has not been recovered, deliberate silence about specific evidence categories is standard practice, consistent with active evidence protection, not with an absence of relevant findings. If additional device data exists and is being protected, it supplements the Pacemaker cardiac timeline with independently sourced corroborating information. Each independent data stream carries its own chain of custody, its own authentication pathway through the manufacturer or platform provider, and its own evidentiary weight.
multiple independent data streams, each consistent with the same 41-minute physiological narrative,
present a multi-source forensic picture that becomes progressively harder to challenge on any single evidentiary ground. The FBI's strategic silence about the pacemaker data specifics must be understood against the documented reality of how active federal kidnapping investigations manage public communication. Every specific finding disclosed in a press conference reaches not only the public and the media, but also the person or persons responsible for the crime. Every evidence disclosure is simultaneously a briefing for the suspect, an opportunity to destroy remaining physical evidence, modify behavior consistent with guilt, or build a counter-narrative for a future legal defense. In a case where the victim has not been recovered and the primary suspect has not been publicly identified, the calculation around public disclosure is conservative by design and necessity. Retired FBI Special Agent Jennifer Coffindaffer, who appeared on NBC News in February 2025 and commented publicly on the Guthrie investigation, described the Bureau's posture in a case of this profile as one of extreme discipline regarding public confirmation of evidentiary details. She noted that in cases where forensic findings are strong, the incentive to protect those findings from premature public exposure is stronger, not weaker. The FBI has maintained that silence on the pacemaker data specifics for 68 days. Investigators who have built nothing are often the most vocal. Investigators who have built something worth protecting say very little. The silence is not absence, it is protection. The question of what cardiac device data can accomplish in a federal prosecution is not theoretical. It has been adjudicated in an American courtroom. The outcome of that case is part of the documented legal record that now forms the evidentiary precedent for what the FBI is building from Nancy Guthrie's pacemaker data. In 2017, in Ross Township, Hamilton County, Ohio, a man named Richard Combs was charged with aggravated arson and insurance fraud. His house had caught fire. He claimed to investigators that he had been asleep at the time, woke only when the fire was already engulfing the structure, and barely escaped. His implanted pacemaker recorded something incompatible with that account. The device data showed a heart rate and physical activity pattern during the window of the fire that was inconsistent with sleep and consistent with vigorous physical movement. The kind of cardiac and activity signature associated with a person who was awake, physically active, and exerting themselves during the period they claimed to have been unconscious. He was convicted. A Hamilton County judge ruled the cardiac device data admissible as evidence. That ruling established one of the earliest formal legal precedents for the use of pacemaker data in American criminal proceedings. It has not been reversed or limited by any subsequent court ruling. It stands in the record. Federal investigators are aware of it. The forensic cardiologists they retain are aware of it. And the federal prosecutors in the District of Arizona working the Guthrie investigation are aware of it. In the Combs case, the cardiac data served a single and narrow function. It destroyed an alibi. It replaced a human account with a physiological record. In Nancy Guthrie's case, the cardiac data serves a different and substantially more expansive function. There is no alibi to destroy at this stage, because no suspect has been publicly named. What the data does here is reconstruct the crime itself. It documents the physiological arc of the abduction from the acute stress spike at 1:47 a.m. through the sustained fear of the first phase, the movement-consistent modulation of the second phase, and the sedation-consistent terminal pattern of the third. It gives prosecutors a time-stamped physiological narrative of a crime that occurred during a 41-minute window when no external surveillance was operating. That narrative is sourced to a certified medical device,
authenticated through manufacturer records and programming documentation already under federal subpoena, and interpretable by a forensic cardiologist in plain language on a witness stand. Building that prosecution-ready case requires 3 documented steps that the FBI has been working on for 68 days. The first step is establishing and maintaining the complete chain of custody for the subpoenaed cloud data from the moment of legal service through every subsequent forensic analysis step. Any documented gap in that chain becomes a point of attack in cross-examination. The chain of custody documentation has been building continuously since the subpoena was served in the first week of February 2025. The second step is securing the manufacturer's complete documentation of the specific clinical parameters programmed into Nancy Guthrie's individual device, the patient-specific baseline against which every anomaly in the 41-minute window is measured and given meaning. That documentation is part of the subpoenaed materials. The third step is retaining and preparing forensic cardiologists with the specific credentials, the specific case experience, and the specific communication skills required to translate complex cardiac device data into plain language for 12 non-medical jurors. Federal prosecutors in the District of Arizona are executing all 3 steps simultaneously with the FBI's forensic team. The foundation is documented. The precedent is established. The framework exists. What it is waiting for is a named suspect at a defense table in a federal courtroom. The pacemaker data is the forensic foundation of this investigation. It is not by itself the arrest warrant.
It is the fixed physiological record against which every other piece of evidence, every suspect, and every alibi will eventually be measured. Physiological data alone does not produce a conviction in a federal court. You need a suspect. You need to be able to place a specific named person inside the documented physiological narrative that Nancy Guthrie's pacemaker recorded across those 41 minutes in the Catalina Foothills of Tucson, Arizona. The documented paths toward that placement fall into 4 categories. The FBI is working all 4 simultaneously, and has been since February 2025. The first path is the pharmaceutical procurement trail. If the forensic cardiac interpretation of the third phase of the 41-minute window is correct, if the data is consistent with pharmacological sedation, as forensic cardiologists have described comparable patterns, then someone acquired a medical-grade central nervous system depressant prior to the night of February 1st for the purpose of administering it during this abduction. That acquisition required access through a specific channel, a medical professional contact, a diverted or fraudulently obtained prescription, a theft from a clinical facility, or a dark web marketplace transaction. Controlled substance procurement in the United States in 2025 is monitored through a layered regulatory system. The Prescription Drug Monitoring Program operates in all 50 states and tracks the prescribing and dispensing of Schedule 2 through 5 controlled substances by individual prescription. The Drug Enforcement Administration maintains national distribution level records. Medical facilities track controlled substance inventory through regulatory systems that flag discrepancies. Acquiring the compound required to produce the documented cardiac pattern without leaving a traceable record in this environment is extremely difficult. The FBI's healthcare fraud and forensic medicine units are trained specifically to reconstruct pharmaceutical procurement trails. The second path is the Bitcoin blockchain record. The ransom demand made in connection with Nancy Guthrie's disappearance included a specific Bitcoin wallet address and a demand for $6 million. That wallet address has been under continuous FBI monitoring since the first week of February 2025. The Bitcoin blockchain is a public, permanent, cryptographically immutable record of every transaction on the network. Every movement of funds into or out of that wallet, now or at any point in the future, is visible to investigators with the forensic tools to monitor it.
The FBI's Cyber Division maintains the capability to monitor blockchain addresses in real time. If the individuals responsible for this abduction ever attempt to move funds from that wallet, the blockchain records the transaction and law enforcement sees it. The address has not moved. The watch continues. The record is permanent. The third path is the DNA profile recovered from the Catalina Foothills property. Law enforcement confirmed in the first days of the investigation that biological material was recovered from Nancy Guthrie's residence. A single glove was collected and subjected to DNA analysis by the FBI laboratory. That analysis produced a genetic profile. At the time of the most recent public reporting on this specific evidence, the profile had not been matched to any individual in law enforcement databases. In an active federal kidnapping investigation of this profile, DNA evidence being carefully withheld from public disclosure is typically evidence being preserved for the moment a suspect is identified and their DNA becomes available for comparison. The profile exists. It is waiting. The fourth path is human intelligence. The planning documented in the Pacemaker data and the external evidence, a timed intrusion at a specific private residence,
A surveillance system disabled with precision, a firearm, a sedating compound, a pre-prepared ransom demand with a cryptocurrency wallet address, does not materialize without preparation. Preparation involves people, conversations, coordination, sourcing, reconnaissance of the Catalina Foothills property. At least one person beyond those directly involved has been carrying knowledge of what happened on the night of January 31st into February 1st for 68 days. Knowledge of this weight does not lighten with time. It accumulates. The Guthrie family's $1 million reward for information leading to Nancy's recovery is active. The FBI tip line is 1-800-CALL-FBI. That is 1-800-2255-324. Anonymous submissions can be made at tips.fbi.gov. Any one of these four paths could produce a break within hours of a development. The FBI is working all four, with the Pacemaker data at the center. Day 68. Nancy Guthrie's pacemaker has been running without clinical oversight for 68 days. The battery powering the device, designed for years of continuous operation, has been functioning in an unknown environment since the morning of February 1st, 2025. The leads connecting the device to her heart have been operating without the monitoring her cardiologist at her treating facility in Tucson would ordinarily provide at regular clinical intervals. The medical advisors working alongside the FBI's investigative team have been clear about this. Finding Nancy Guthrie is not only a matter of justice and answers, it is a clinical urgency. An 84-year-old woman with an implanted cardiac device that requires ongoing medical supervision is without that supervision in an unknown location. Every day that passes without Nancy being found is another day that the clinical attention her condition requires is not being provided. 68 days. The forensic record that Nancy Guthrie's pacemaker built on the night of February 1st, 2025, cannot be amended. It cannot be deleted from the manufacturer's cloud platform, where it was received and stored under federal subpoena before anyone could prevent its preservation. It cannot be intimidated or coached into providing a different account. It is a machine record. It does not have an interest in the outcome of this investigation. Her own heart, the heart that has been beating for 84 years, through the raising of daughters in Tucson, through the decades of a life lived in the Catalina Foothills at the base of the Santa Catalina Mountains, recorded what was done to her in those 41 minutes. The fear at 1:47 a.m., logged and time-stamped as the camera went dark. The sustained distress through the first phase of the window, logged and time-stamped against her individual clinical baseline from that same night. The movement, the sedation, every phase, every second, received by the manufacturer's cloud system and preserved under the authority of a federal subpoena served in the first week of February 2025.
The masked figure captured on the Google Nest cloud backup footage at 1:47 a.m., carrying a backpack and a firearm, approaching the front entrance of Nancy Guthrie's Catalina Foothills home, has not been publicly identified. The $6 million ransom demand and the Bitcoin wallet address included in that demand have not been publicly resolved. The DNA genetic profile recovered from the glove found at the Catalina Foothills property has not been publicly matched to a named individual. The 68 days of fraudulent claims, unverifiable anonymous communications, and media noise surrounding this case, none of that changes what is inside the Pacemaker cloud data. None of it alters the documented physiological record of those 41 minutes. None of it erases what Nancy Guthrie's heart recorded and what the FBI has been preparing for a courtroom for 68 days. Someone planned this.
Someone sourced the sedating compound and acquired it through a channel that leaves a pharmaceutical trail. Someone did reconnaissance on a private residence in the Catalina Foothills neighborhood of Tucson, Arizona. Someone disabled a Google Nest security camera at 1:47 a.m. on February 1st, 2025, while carrying a backpack and a firearm. And Nancy Guthrie's heart recorded every second of what happened after that camera went dark. The procurement trail exists somewhere in the controlled substance record. The Bitcoin wallet is under continuous observation. The DNA profile is preserved and waiting for a comparison sample. And somewhere, a person is carrying 68 days of knowledge that does not get lighter. It gets heavier. It always does. If you have any information, any detail, however small, that relates to what happened on the night of January 31st into February 1st, 2025, in the Catalina Foothills neighborhood of Tucson, Arizona, the FBI wants to hear from you. The tip line is 1-800-CALL-FBI. That is 1-800-225-5324. You can submit anonymously online at tips.fbi.gov. The Guthrie family's $1 million reward for information leading to Nancy's recovery is active. 68 days. Nancy Guthrie's heart recorded what happened. The FBI has that record. And every day this investigation advances, the forensic case built from those 41 minutes becomes more complete, more documented, and more prosecution ready. Subscribe to Guilt Veil and turn on notifications so you never miss a story. If this case moved you, share it. Someone out there needs to hear it. Every case, every truth, every verdict.